بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome to another session with Mukhtasar Minhaj al-Qasidin. And of course, with all of that, speaking of kids, this section of the textbook that we're reviewing is Spiritual Training for Little Ones, which begins the beginning of their development. The author, he says that you should recognize that young children, they are a trust the parents hold. Their hearts are like innocent vessels, they're gems, and they are subject to whatever is impressed upon them. They are very impressionable. If they are accustomed to righteousness, they will grow up in such a manner. And the parents and their teachers who trained them in such a way will share in the reward. But if they are accustomed to evil, they will also grow up in that way. And the sin will be the burden of their guardian. So you should take care of this trust. Train them well, refine them, teach them good character, and protect them from evil companions. Do not get them accustomed to luxury. Do not endear them to the avenues of opulence, because they will waste their entire life in search for those things. Rather, you should supervise them at the beginning of their lives as young children. And do not employ a wet nurse. That's not something we're typically doing today. But also, do not employ a nanny or a babysitter who is not a righteous, religious woman. The wet nurse, he says, who does not eat halal, because the milk that your child would drink is from haram, and there's no barakah in it. And when they reach the age of discernment, which is around the time that they first become shy, they develop the shyness, then this, if they have that shyness, is an excellent quality. It's kind of a glimmering or a glad tidings of sorts of a developing mind when they reach puberty. And so this type of child, they should be encouraged and trained to be shy, to have shame, that is. The first thing that will overcome them, and this of course is in a negative way, from the evil qualities, is gluttony. The first challenge that children will have is gluttony. And here we're talking specifically about food. It's not being gluttonous towards other things. He says gluttony in regards to food, overeating. And so the parents, they should teach their children the manners of eating and get them accustomed to eating bread alone. You know, they used to eat bread and something with it, like a soup or a porridge. Get them accustomed to eating bread, like eat simple things. Have them do that some of the times so that they don't get used to having, let's say, meat and lavish meals all of the time. Every once in a while is fine, but they should get used to eating in moderation and simple things. You should also help them understand the repugnance of overeating. You have to paint a very ugly picture of that quality and compare it to how animals eat. This is how the animals consume. They eat in abundance. You see, the Imam constantly brings up food and how it's to be approached. And we'll see why shortly. He's going to really highlight the outlook and the philosophy, I should say, behind what food should be. The next kind of idea here is you should encourage them to wear white clothes, and not things that are made of silk. Obviously, especially for males, it's impermissible for them to wear silk. Explain to them that silk is to be worn by women or the effeminate, essentially hermaphrodites. We'll say effeminate here in this case. So the hermaphrodite is like the physiological hermaphrodite here. That's something that they cannot help. They are born in that case, in that situation. But then worse off are those that are straddling the gender lines today, at least I think. Also, you should prevent them from mixing with children, hanging out with other kids who've become accustomed to opulence and luxury. They should be busy with school, learning the Quran, studying hadith, learning about the stories of the pious, so that this will take root in their hearts and they will love the righteous. And they shouldn't be memorizing poetry that contains verses of ishq, which is like love and romance. And I guess today we could say what the kids are memorizing, song lyrics. That's a whole other topic, music, etc. Because you can't compare the two in the ruling in Islam, poetry and music, the two different rulings. But I mean, reality is most kids are not learning poetry, they're listening to music and often memorizing the lyrics to very illicit songs at a very young age. So that's something that has to be watched out for. Prevent them from doing such. Then he says, when a child displays some good qualities, does something that's praiseworthy, then you should award them. Give them an award that will make them happy. You should praise them in front of other people. And if they do the opposite, meaning something repugnant or ugly, something of bad character, it comes out. This may happen from time to time. Then you should ignore this. Do not expose it. And then you can talk to them in secret if it happens again. You should be worried that, or explain to them that people should not see them in such a state. But the admonition should not be abundant. Admonition should come sparingly. If it is abundant, then it will become easy for them to hear blame. Being blameworthy will become an easy thing to accept if they constantly hear admonition. And while you're doing it, you should be very careful as to what you are saying. He says that the mother should inculcate in the kids a fear of their father. And we could say one of respect. And this is devastated when the mother argues with her husband in front of the children. Essentially, she's teaching the children that anyone can talk back to daddy. And eventually they will start to talk back to daddy. Anyone can stand up to dad. And eventually they're likely to stand up to dad in such a way. So the mother has an extremely important role in instilling within the kids a level of respect for the father. Because ultimately the father is the one that's responsible. He's going to bear the burden of guilt in the event that the kids run off the rails. And so there's a very, very sacred thing that's happening here in this relationship. And the mother needs to honor that. Kids should be prevented from sleeping during the day because this produces laziness and lethargy. They should not be prevented from sleeping at night. But at night, it shouldn't be in luxury. Bedding that's overly luxurious. The idea is to strengthen the kids, get them used to basics, coarseness of furnishings, clothing, food, basic things they should become accustomed to. They should become accustomed to walking and moving and exercise so that they don't become lazy. This is another pandemic, if you will, that we're looking at now with the video games and the media. They're actually starting to see the negative impact of too much video game playing now, especially in boys. They're sitting, there's a lot that happens. So this is something that has to be monitored and controlled. They should also be prevented from boasting and bragging in front of their friends about something that they own or that their parents possess. The types of food that they eat or the clothes that they wear. They shouldn't be bragging and boasting to others. They should also be prevented from taking things from other kids and taught that the hand that gives is better than the hand that receives. They should be taught that gold and silver are qabih. It's something that's repugnant. They should be taught that you don't spit in gatherings, you don't blow your nose in front of others, you don't yawn in front of people, you don't put one leg on top of the other. And then they should be prevented from speaking too much. They should be taught that when they are talking, it's in response to an answer. They were asked something and then they respond. They should be listening when someone else is talking, especially if they're older. And they should stand up when someone older than them comes in, and allow them to sit, or they sit right in front of them. They should not be allowed to use vulgar language, and then not be allowed to mix with those that do. Because the mixing here with other people is at the foundation of safeguarding young ones, keeping them away from negative influence. And then room should be made for them after they leave school so that they can play games. They can relax and rest from the arduous tasks of their refinement, education, and training. This is something that should be permitted and allowed for them. Their teachers should work towards teaching them to be obedient to their parents and respect them, to honor their parents. That's a role of a teacher. And when they reach 7 years of age, they should be ordered to pray and should not be excused from making wudu or tahara, so that they can get accustomed that one is associated with the other. They should be scared of lying and betrayal. The parent's job is to instill fear in them when it comes to lying and betrayal. And when they get close to puberty, then you can start assigning them the other tasks and religious obligations. He says it's important to recognize that food, we go back to this issue, food is like medicine. What's intended by it is to strengthen the body so that one can be obedient to Allah. And that the dunya, the world here, la baqa'a laha. It's not eternal. You're not going to stay here forever. And that death is going to sever all of its pleasures, and it's something that we're waiting for every hour. And so a person with sound intelligence and rationale, they will gather the provisions for the hereafter. And so if their upbringing is righteous, then it will be fixed in their hearts, just like the engraving on a stone. We leave with a little story or example from the past. His name was Sahl ibn Abdullah. Sahal ibn Abdullah, he was one of the great imams of the mystics, the Sufiya. He was from their scholars, and from the mutakallimin fi ulum al-ikhlas, riyadat, wa ayub al-af'al, basically spoke about these types of matters a great deal. Spiritual training and sincerity, the flaws of mankind. He has a tafsir book that he authored, among other things. He has his history is documented fi tabaqat al-sufiyya wal-a'lam. So he said, I was 3 years old. I would get up at night and I would watch my uncle Muhammad ibn Suwar, who was his sheikh. I would watch him in prayer. And my uncle said to me one day, will you not remember Allah who created you? And so I said, how should I remember Allah? He said, say in your heart 3 times without moving your tongue, Allah is with me. Allah is watching me. Allah is witnessing me. He said, so I said that for a number of nights. And then I came to know it. I told him about that. He said to me, say it every night 11 times. And so I did that. And when I did that, there was this sweetness that came into my heart. And then after a year, I told my uncle, after a year, my uncle told me, he said, remember what I taught you and be consistent with it until you enter the grave. And so I continued for years. And there was this delight that was found in my heart. And then my uncle said, Ya Sahal, man kana Allahu ma'ah, wa huwa nadirun ilayh, wa shahidun alayh, hal ya'asi. If Allah is with you, and He's watching you and witnessing you, then how will they sin and be disobedient to Him? Iyaka wal ma'siyah. Stay away from sin. And so then I went to school, memorized the Quran by the age of 6 or 7. And then I would fast the entire year. And the provisions that I did have, there were wheat bread. And then after that, I would stand it in the night in prayer in its entirety. So this is an example, Sahal ibn Abdullah, of what a good upbringing can do, the fruits that it can produce, the outcomes that many of us parents are hoping and praying for. The reality is, as important as hopes and prayers are, there certainly seems to be a lot of work that has to go into it, as mentioned by our great imams here. And that's where I'll leave you for this session. Jazakallah khair for your attendance and your attentive listening. And it looks like we're on schedule to wrap up our goals by tomorrow or the next day, inshallah. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam ala nabiyyina.